Skeletons of the Marital Closet by Tang. Chapter 1891. How could a married woman with 2 children be any fun? Your tastes are truly unique, Paul remarked. Suddenly Paul felt a sense of danger. He could not afford to offend Orem, but even more so he could not afford to offend the Wood family. They were a wealthy and influential family. A single word from them could ruin him, or even make him disappear from the entertainment industry. Paul realized he might have made a mistake. Scared? Orem observed his expression. What's there to fear? You haven't offended the Wood family, it's just Ivy. What can she do to you? Paul stuttered. Though he had not touched Gale and dared not to entertain the thought, he had helped Orem plan it out, so he was an accomplice. Paul hesitated before asking, Orem, did you achieve your goal that night? If Orem had indeed had an affair with Gale, things would have escalated. Then again, this was also a leverage Paul could hold. If one day Orem stopped protecting him and even tried to make him a scapegoat, he could report this matter to Shawn. He quickly thought to dig for more information so he could have a safety line for his future. Orem's face darkened, looking extremely unpleasant. Seeing his expression, Paul guessed. You didn't succeed? How's that possible? I've done my part successfully. Orem remained silent. Each time he thought about it, Orem felt extremely regretful. Why had he not been quicker? Why had he not been more decisive? He should have consumed Gale's body first before anything else. He had been too tender and too loving toward her. The moment she lay motionless beside him, letting him do as he pleased, he had relished it, wanting to savor it slowly, bit by bit. Who knew that Shawn's bodyguard would arrive so soon? No one knew the truth. Paul waited for his response, but Orem remained silent. His heart skipped a beat. Mr. Lefting, did you fail? Before he could finish his sentence, Orem shot him a cold glance. What did you say? Paul immediately shut his mouth. He should not be asking. He was too nosy, and it could get him into trouble. It was better to know as little as possible about such matters. What you did, I did the same. Orem pursed his lips. He would not admit that he had failed. Absolutely not. Orem would not let it slip, even to Paul. When everyone believed that he and Gale had already slept together, just let them continue thinking that. As long as he kept repeating it, it would come true. Orem had kept brainwashing himself, repeatedly telling himself that he had sex with Gale. Only with his unwavering belief could he make others believe it too, particularly Shawn. Shawn had been investigating him all along, and he knew it. However, Orem was extremely cautious and careful, leaving no clues or evidence behind. He would let him investigate. Even if Shawn dug deep, he would find nothing. Chapter 1892. Suddenly they heard a clang from the restroom. Orem's expression instantly changed. Who was in his office? Paul also looked bewildered. Where did that sound come from? Orem got up immediately. He was about to go toward the source of the sound when his secretary knocked on the door. Mr. Lefting, come in! The secretary entered with some snacks, looking puzzled as she glanced at the couch. Mr. Lefting, where's Ivy? Why isn't she here? Did she leave early? What did you say? Orem gritted his teeth. Ivy is in my office? Yes, Mr. Lefting. Ivy arrived when you were out, so I brought her to your office and asked her to wait for you. Then I went to prepare the refreshments. So, the person in the restroom was Ivy. She had been here all along. Then, Ivy must have heard the entire conversation. Paul's face turned pale. Orem. What to do? If Ivy found out the truth and reported it to Mr. Wood, everyone would be doomed. Offending the great, vengeful Mr. Wood meant a lifetime of misery. Orem remained silent, quickly making his way to the restroom. In that short 10 seconds, Orem had already thought of a plan. If Ivy had heard it all, then either he would convince her to stay on his side, or offer her enough benefits to keep her quiet. If she refused to agree, Orem thought he would resort to threats. He would find a way to silence Ivy. Meanwhile, in the restroom, Ivy stared at the lipstick on the floor. She had accidentally dropped it, and whoever was outside must know she was there. Even if she held onto the lipstick tightly and did not drop it, her presence would eventually be discovered. There was nowhere to hide. What should she do now? Ivy's hands trembled, her vision blurred for a moment, feeling faint. Her survival instinct kicked in and told her that she could not collapse at this very moment. There could not be any mistakes at this critical moment. The more urgent the situation, the more important it was to maintain composure. Ivy bit her tongue hard, forcing herself to stay alert. The footsteps drew closer. Orem was coming in. Ivy blacked out for a few seconds from the fear. However, in that split second of clarity, Ivy devised a plan. Orem's face grew dark and cold as he pushed open the door to the restroom. He looked inside. Ivy was applying lipstick in front of the mirror, and the countertop was filled with various cosmetics. Ivy was wearing Bluetooth earphones, humming a tune, genuinely focusing on her makeup. Startled by the sudden push of the door, she jolted and trembled slightly, looking toward the door. Aurum? Chapter 1893. Ivy smiled, removing her headphones and placing them casually aside. Aurum gazed at her, saying nothing. Your secretary asked me to wait for you in the office. I sat for a while and then came to the restroom, thinking of touching up my makeup. I was listening to music, and I couldn't hear someone coming in, so I didn't know you had returned, Ivy explained, setting down her lipstick. Ivy maintained a casual expression. Aurum's gaze shifted from her face to the countertop, where scattered cosmetics, headphones, a handbag, and a phone with a screen displaying a famous European rock song. Sorry, Aurum, give me 5 more minutes. I'll be done quickly, Ivy said. They locked eyes. Ivy gave him a cool and alluring smile. After all, a female star was a female star and irresistibly beautiful. He would have long been enchanted if it were an ordinary man, forgetting why he was there. However, Ivy was facing Aurum, and he was no ordinary man. Aurum stared at Ivy for several seconds. The seconds felt like hours. Throughout those seconds, Ivy showed no signs of anything unusual, at least not anything Aurum could notice. After a pause, Aurum's expression softened. I heard a noise and thought someone was hiding in my office, trying to spy on my business. I came to check, didn't expect it to be you, he said. Your secretary brought me in. Didn't she inform you? If it's inconvenient, I won't. Before Ivy could finish, Aurum smiled gently. It's fine. If it's you, it's fine. I hope I haven't caused any trouble for you, Ivy replied politely. You can continue with your makeup. No rush. The assistant director hasn't arrived yet, only Paul. I guess you won't want to see him. Better wait until more people come out, Aurum suggested. Okay, thank you, Ivy replied. No problem. After Aurum spoke, his gaze returned to Ivy's face, carefully assessing her. Yet he could not discern anything amiss. Ivy met his gaze confidently. Aurum did not say anything more. He closed the restroom door. As the door shut, his expression fluctuated, standing there with a furrowed brow. Meanwhile, Ivy continued to look at herself in the mirror, picking up an eyebrow pencil to start shaping her brows. It seemed like nothing had happened. After a while, footsteps outside faded away. Only then did Ivy revert back to her normal self. It was like her mask came off. Her hands trembled as she drew a long, irregular line at the end of her eyebrow. She leaned on the countertop, closing her eyes and taking deep breaths repeatedly. She told herself to calm down. This was just the beginning. She would have to go back to the office and face more people. She needed to maintain enough composure to get through this ordeal completely. There were even more difficult challenges waiting for her. She couldn't slack off, nor could she make any mistakes. Ivy also understood very well that Aurum's probing would not end. He would keep trying to find out if she had heard anything she should not have. The moment Aurum pushed the door, Ivy caught a glimpse of his gaze. It was so dark and murderous. It was the first time she had seen Aurum, who was usually mild-mannered, with such an expression. He seemed like a different person. Ivy had to maintain enough composure not to let Aurum notice anything amiss. Otherwise she might not walk out of this office intact today. She had heard secrets she should not have. Chapter 1894. That night's truth seemed to be on the verge of being exposed. Ivy decided she had to go and tell Shawn about this. Only he could think of how to resolve this. Ivy, acting is your profession. Now, it's time for you to act, to truly display your acting skills. Stay calm, stay composed. You are a queen of the screen. From now on you are someone who knows nothing, a naive and innocent character who has been kept in the dark, she said to herself, looking at herself in the mirror. Anyone would have panicked when Aurum had opened the door. Even if they tried to hide or disguise it, they would inevitably show traces of their emotions on their faces, making it easy to see through them. However, Ivy was an actress. Her greatest skill was acting. She would portray herself as someone who knew nothing, and would continue to act that way seamlessly so as not to arouse any suspicion from Aurum. Ivy picked up her eyebrow pencil again, wiping away the messy lines and carefully redrawing them. Inside the office, Paul was already feeling weak in the knees. Aurum? Is it really Ivy in the restroom? Yeah, but she must have heard everything. Paul exclaimed in surprise. Aurum glanced at him. If you speak loud. Paul quickly covered his mouth, feeling completely at a loss for what to do. Aurum, she has been in the restroom the whole time. She definitely heard everything, Paul said. Aurum furrowed his brows tightly. I'm not sure yet whether she heard or not. Orem also enjoyed listening to the rock music playing on Ivy's phone. It was a loud song, and Ivy was wearing earphones, so logically, she would not hear any sounds from outside. Could Ivy be deceiving them? How can we confirm this? She must have heard it. Otherwise, why would she be in the restroom? Is she deaf? Paul asked anxiously. Paul leaned closer to Orem and whispered, "Think of a way to deal with Ivy. If we cannot control her, then eliminate her, otherwise there will be trouble." Orem stood with his hands on his hips, pacing back and forth in front of the sofa. He knew he had to bring Ivy under his control. If it were anyone else, regardless of whether they had heard, he would have dealt with them decisively, ensuring no mistakes were made. However, Ivy was different. She was the first female artist signed under Wood Group, and she had a good relationship with Gale. If he suddenly made a move against Ivy, it would be exposing himself. Moreover, he did not have a legitimate reason. If he tried to get rid of Ivy, then Shawn would definitely protect her. "Orem, why are you hesitating? Whether she heard it or not, she's been in the office. Her presence alone is a threat." Paul asked. "Shut up! Am I looking for advice?" Orem was already feeling annoyed, and Paul's incessant provocation only made it worse. After a while, Orem stopped pacing and glanced toward the direction of the restroom. "Let's wait and see. Don't act rashly for now," he said coldly. "Yes, Mr. Lefting." Orem urged. "Call your assistant director to come over quickly." Paul hurriedly made the call. 2 minutes later, Ivy walked out of the restroom. Her makeup was flawless, looking beautiful and clean, but it could not mask her fatigue. Ivy walked over to the sofa in her heels. "Is it just you in here? Where are the others? Did you chase them away for me?" Chapter 1895. "They'll be here soon. Have a seat," Orem said. "Okay." Ivy sat down and casually ran her fingers through her hair. Orem's gaze remained on her, always with a scrutinizing air. She noticed it but pretended not to. Ivy remained perfectly composed, showing no hint of anything amiss. The two began to tango. "Have you rested well these days? Feels like you haven't fully recovered," Orem asked. Ivy replied softly, "Even when wounds heal, it leaves scars. I've been through some pretty traumatic things. Even if it heals, the scar remains." "Sorry, it's my..." "Don't blame yourself. Let's not talk about that anymore and focus on the movie," Ivy interrupted. Orem nodded, then glanced at her clothes. "You didn't come directly from home, did you?" "No, I went to Wood Group." Orem, already tense, became even more nervous at the mention of that. "I'm Levito's spokesperson. I went there today for a photo shoot. If everything goes smoothly, the adverts will be out next week and you'll see my pictures in the malls then," Ivy said nonchalantly. Orem nodded. "I hope your work goes smoothly and you recover soon." "Thank you." Orem poured her a cup of tea and asked, "Is the temperature okay? Not too cold?" "It's just right." Ivy lowered her head and took a sip, and when her eyes met Orem again, she concealed her panic once more, ensuring no breaks in her character. She had not heard anything and did not know anything. Orem stared at her wordlessly, his eyes seeming to contain a hint of affection, faint but present. When a man looked at a woman like this, it was easy for the woman to misunderstand. Ivy had misunderstood before. Now, she just felt it was terrifying. Orem was clearly doing this on purpose. He was deliberately looking at her like this, deliberately making her daydream. But in fact, he had not said anything. It was all her overthinking. What exactly did Orem want to do? His goal was clearly Gale, yet he wanted to flirt with her. Moreover, he colluded with Paul, doing unspeakable, shameful things. The more she thought about it, the more eerie it felt. Orem was not as simple as he appeared on the surface. However, Ivy continued to calmly sip her tea. At this moment, it was a battle of the nerves. The first person to lose it would lose. Orem would not confront her directly for now. Pretending to be ignorant would be enough. "I know you have grievances against Paul and it's an irreconcilable hatred. Ivy, I really want to help you, but he's the director, and I cannot replace him," Orem suddenly said. Ivy lowered her eyes and turned the teacup in her hand. "I know, I don't blame you, and I don't hold any grudges. I'm sorry, I can't help you in any way," Orem said, pretending to be filled with self-blame. Chapter 1896. She did not speak and looked despondent. Suddenly, Orem stood up and walked over to her, gently patting her shoulder. Eventually, his hand settled on her shoulder, giving it a firm yet gentle squeeze. The warmth of his hand through her clothes touched her skin, and it tingled. Ivy remained motionless. In her mind, she recalled the first time she met Orem. He had intervened and saved her from the skateboarders. Back then, Orem was like a knight on a white horse, an image that Ivy remembered for a long time, and was the beginning of her infatuation. But now, Ivy felt a chill run down her spine. Perhaps that encounter was also orchestrated by Orem. Ivy, we are friends. If you ever need anything from me in the future, just ask. Of course, with your support from the Wood family, Mr. Wood has the power and influence to help you with anything. My assistance may not be necessary, Orem said. How could it be unnecessary? I'm already touched by your kindness, Ivy replied. She glanced at Orem before lowering her head, resembling a woman in love but too afraid to express her feelings. She was an actress. Ivy understood best what role to play in any situation. At this moment, her acting skills were saving her. She must safely leave this office. Orem looked at Ivy, and his doubts slowly faded, but it had not completely vanished. He needed to continue observing and evaluating. After some thought, he said, Ivy, to be honest, I don't view you any differently because of what happened between you and Paul. I don't look down on you in the slightest. You are still an outstanding actress, the star I admire. Ivy's body trembled slightly. Then she asked, Really? You don't feel disgusted by me at all? Never. Never have, Orem replied quickly. Ivy lowered her head further. But what happened between me and Paul? Let's just pretend it never happened. I told you that I don't mind and I don't look down on you. Ivy fell silent. After a while, she raised her head to meet Orem's gaze. Actually, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. What is it? Orem appeared very gentle, but he was already strategizing in his mind. He had not expected Ivy to become a minefield. He did not know if it would explode, when it would explode, and whether it was even a bomb at all. She could very well still be an innocent pawn he could continue to manipulate. Ivy hesitated and seemed reluctant to speak. In the end, she asked softly, Orem, is it true that you and Gale were like Paul and I? Orem's pupils contracted. I don't mean anything else. Just, two, Ivy hurriedly explained. She seemed at a loss for words, her expression anxious. Orem withdrew his hand and sat down next to her. The two were very close. I was unconscious that night, so I'm not sure exactly what happened. The evidence speaks for itself, Orem replied. So, you don't know if anything happened? You just assumed, based on your experience and feelings, that you and Gale had sex? Ivy asked. She saw Orem's face visibly stiffen. Chapter 1897. She pretended not to notice it. The facts are there. Our clothes were off, and we hugged each other. This is undeniable evidence, Orem said. After a pause, Orem added, Shawn also saw it. His tone was somewhat heavy and somewhat aggressive. After saying it, he realized he had been a bit too harsh. I spoke out of turn. I shouldn't have asked. I'm sorry, Ivy said. It's okay, Orem replied, feeling a bit annoyed and not in a good mood. However, he did not want to show it in front of Ivy, so he continued to restrain himself. What did Ivy mean by suddenly asking this? Did she want to prove that she had not heard his conversation with Paul in the bathroom, or was she deliberately testing him? Orem currently had no way of knowing whether Ivy was aware of what had happened or not. He did not know how to deal with her for now. Orem was sure of one thing. Ivy liked him, and she had feelings for him. He was trying to play that card. He had deliberately shown her warmth, creating physical contact to tug on her heartstrings. If Ivy fell in love with him, he could control her, just like Natalie back then. Orem quickly decided that he must make Ivy fall deeply in love with him. Only a woman deeply in love with him would willingly serve him, and be controlled by him. Knock, knock, knock. At this moment there was a knock on the door. Shortly after, Paul and several assistant directors and producers entered one after another. Paul glanced at Ivy, his eyes full of guilt, but quickly shifted his gaze, not daring to make eye contact with her at all. Ivy sat upright on the sofa, calm and composed. From beginning to end, she had not done anything wrong. She had no reason to feel guilty. Let's start the meeting. It's good that Ivy is here today too. Orem smiled, his tone relaxed and light as if nothing had happened. The assistant directors glanced at Ivy and made some assumptions about how she got there. She clearly looked like Orem's favorite. Ivy had gained quite a reputation for herself. One could not help but admire her tactics, with the support of Shawn and Orem who could say anything to her. Ivy also maintained a polite smile. She thought, let them misunderstand. She did not care anymore. In the past, she valued her reputation, and was very proud. However, since she had fallen prey to Paul, she felt like she had nothing left and could not hold on to anything. So she decided to use these rumors to solidify her career in the entertainment industry. From then on, no one dared to bully her with Shawn and Orem's backing. Their misunderstanding was her weapon. 2 hours later the meeting ended. Ivy was the first to stand. I won't disturb you all any longer. I'll leave first. Chapter 1898. Orem furrowed his brows as he looked at her, his gaze darkening slightly. You are in such a hurry to leave? I'm very tired. I had a shoot earlier. I just want to go home and rest, Ivy replied, her fatigue evident on her face, with no attempt to conceal it. She truly needed to get home as quickly as possible. Every second spent here was torture. I was actually thinking of having dinner together tonight, but since you want to go home, let me drive you, Orem said. It's not necessary to trouble you. It's no trouble. Let's go, Orem said as he picked up his car keys and grabbed her bag. Then, he looked at Paul and the others. You can all go now. Only then did they snap out of their daze and quickly bid farewell to them. Orem was ushering them out. He wanted to spend time alone with Ivy. Ivy really knows how to get around. Orem has fallen for her charm and is at her mercy, one of the assistant directors remarked. Another assistant director commented, I thought she was so arrogant, but it turns out she's just a plaything for the rich. Paul remained silent. He knew that Orem was testing Ivy and figuring out how to pull her into his camp. Whatever the outcome of the test, if he were Orem, he should just get rid of Ivy. Better to be safe than sorry. Orem drove and eventually stopped in an upscale residential area. We're here. Thank you for personally driving me back, Ivy said, peering outside. Orem turned his head to look at her, his eyes shining in the darkness. Ivy, you've been thanking me quite a lot today, and you're becoming increasingly polite. I'm genuinely grateful, Orem. I haven't done anything for you. I hope I can be of assistance to you. Can you give me that chance? Orem said. With that, he reached out and tousled her hair, his movements affectionate. It was an intimate gesture. Orem was deliberately leading her to overthink and misunderstand. Ivy's heart sank. If she had truly been listening to music with her headphones on today, unaware of anything, this would have tugged on her heartstrings. She would have started fantasizing and wondering if he liked her. Unfortunately, she had heard everything. She knew how to play her role. Ivy adjusted the strands of hair falling by her ear, looking bright and shy. Of course, you have a chance, bye-bye. She got out of the car and waved goodbye to him. Orem waved back. Ivy walked into the residential area without looking back, but she knew Orem was watching her. It was not until she returned home, turned on all the lights and stood in the living room for a while dazed, that Ivy felt as if all her strength had been drained from her body. She collapsed onto the carpet, leaning against the sofa. It was finally over. She thought she should contact Shawn right away. The day was not over yet. Ivy grabbed her bag from beside her and emptied its contents onto the floor. However, she did not find what she was looking for. It must be here. It must be. It couldn't have disappeared from my bag. Ivy muttered to herself as she frantically searched through the pile of items. When I left the office, Orem wouldn't have helped me carry my bag for no reason. He would have staff to carry bags for him. This isn't right, I'll keep looking. Ivy softly muttered. Chapter 1899. She turned her bag inside out and at last, she found it. It was a miniature listening device. It was as small as a fingernail. Given the clutter of her bag, she would not have noticed it being placed inside. Ivy held her breath and carefully picked up the listening device, cradling it in her palm. Perhaps, at this very moment, Orem was listening in. Once she talked to Shawn and disclosed what she had heard today, her days would be numbered. Since she knew so much, she would suffer a terrible fate. She wondered what she should do. She considered throwing it away, but if Orem could not eavesdrop, he would know she had found out. After pondering for a while, Ivy put the device back in her bag, then threw the bag into the closet in the cloakroom, and locked herself in the bathroom of her guest room. That should be a reasonable distance from the device. Ivy picked up her phone and dialed Shawn's number. Meanwhile, in Temperley Hall, Shawn was attending an online international conference in his study. Gale was in Joshua's room, accompanying their 2 children, not wanting to disturb him. It was a calm and peaceful night. Suddenly, the phone rang, and Shawn glanced at it. Why was Ivy calling him? Without hesitation, Shawn hung up. Once bitten, twice shy. He did not want any contact with Ivy, not even a single phone call. He wanted no part of it. However, as soon as he hung up, Ivy called again. She seemed determined to contact him. Shawn picked up the phone, paused the meeting. He walked to the window, pushed it open, and looked into the distance. Hello? Mr. Wood. Ivy's voice trembled, filled with uncontrollable fear and choking sobs. Shawn frowned slightly. What was wrong with Ivy? Has something happened? An accident, but what did it have to do with him? Why was she calling him? Ivy had a personal assistant, a manager, and about a dozen employees in her personal studio were all there to serve her. If something happened, she could easily find them for help. Shawn remained cool and indifferent. What's the matter? I, too, have some very important news that I must tell you. It's urgent, Ivy said between breaths. Something to tell me? Are you sure? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to tell your employees or maybe tell Gale? Shawn asked. No, I have to tell you, only you, because only you can solve this. Ivy took a deep breath, gripping her phone tightly. She had been acting in front of Orem all evening, and she was already exhausted. Her mind was blank. She was her truest, most vulnerable self now. She was almost on the verge of losing control and collapsing emotionally. Mr. Wood, listen to me, don't hang up. Ivy kept swallowing. I know I'm in a very bad state right now, give me a little time, listen to me. Today, I went to see Orem and Paul. Shawn's brows furrowed even tighter. He remained silent, holding the phone to his ear, patiently listening to Ivy. Chapter 1900. I overheard their conversation. Orem isn't sure if I heard everything. Ivy recounted the events of the afternoon, trying to be as clear as she could. She also disclosed the bug. What should I do, Mr. Wood? Ivy expressed her helplessness. I can't just toss away the bug, but I also don't want to carry it around constantly. However, if I stop using that bag altogether, Orem will become suspicious. Mr. Wood, I swear, everything I heard was with my own ears. I did not make up any of it. Orem must be assessing me now. If he deems me a threat, he'll strike. Ivy's voice quivered as she spoke, nearing tears. She was a lone woman facing a multitude of challenges, shouldering an immense mental and emotional burden. She had nowhere to rely on or confide in. Ivy was originally sailing smoothly through her acting career when she suddenly received an invitation to endorse Levito. She thought her career was taking a turn for the better. In reality, she got what she wanted, but her life was thrown into chaos, veering onto a path that was not meant for her. Now, Ivy could only move forward and choose a side. She wanted to align with Shawn and Gale. She did not want to associate with someone like Orem. Mr. Wood, it's only just dawned on me now. That night when I made plans with Gale, Orem intentionally tried to extract information from me. I was unsuspecting at the time and told him everything. He got the restaurant location and time from me, which gave him the opportunity to prepare for what came next. Paul was his accomplice. They must be in cahoots. Ivy's sobs were particularly clear through the receiver. After a moment, Shawn spoke calmly. Is that all? I've said everything I can think of. Mr. Wood, you have to believe me. I'm not making things up and I'm not crazy. Ivy feared Shawn would not believe her, desperately trying to prove herself. I know. I believe what you're saying, Shawn replied. Ivy breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. That's good. Shawn pursed his lips, swiftly analyzing the situation in his head. Indeed, it was all Orem's doing, a meticulously planned scheme. Ivy's inadvertent eavesdropping confirmed Shawn's suspicions. Now, it was not just him suspecting Orem, Ivy also saw Orem's true colors. I've known Orem was up to something for a while now. These past few days, I've been gathering evidence. It's just that he's covered his tracks too well, leaving no clues behind, Shawn said. Ivy immediately asked, Can I be a witness? I can prove Orem's involvement. You cannot be a witness because he didn't ask you to do anything, and you can't produce any evidence. It is your word against his. So what do we do? Let Orem continue to run rampant? Shawn pondered for a moment. Did you record anything while you were in the bathroom? Ivy was taken aback. At that moment she was utterly shocked and mentally and physically drained. Thinking of escaping Orem's clutches had consumed all her energy and wits.